In a recent safety net newsletter, Ryan Lovelady, who a quality improvement manager for Delaware, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, shares great information on preventing and recognizing physical abuse. The people we support are considered vulnerable. This is because they need care, support, or protection due to age, disability, or risk of abuse or neglect. When assessing for possible abuse, understanding a person's functional status and abilities are critically important. Functional abilities can be assessed by whether or not someone needs assistance in toileting, dressing, bathing, mobility, etc., also known as activities of daily living. Also considered the amount of support needed with meal preparation, laundry, managing medications, managing finances. These activities are known as instrumental activities of daily living. Needing help in one or more of these areas increases the risk of being a victim or a repeat victim of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. The best way for everyone to prevent or recognize physical abuse is to first understand what it is and how someone can be more vulnerable to abuse. Physical abuse is any intentional act that causes injury or trauma to another person by way of bodily contact. Note that the power dynamics between a caregiver, family member, and the person being supported can lead to physical abuse as well. Caregiving are familial relationships that seek to control the individual and/or make decisions for, instead of with, the individual can create unsafe situations that may involve or lead to abuse. The misuse of power, including the threat to control the individual, is abusive. As a person-centered focused organization, we must facilitate power with the person, not power over them. Signs and reactions to physical abuse may differ from person to person, as well as from event to event. Abuse can cause physical, emotional, and/or psychological distress or harm. It can be easier to identify physical signs of abuse when marks on the body are visible. Signs of physical abuse may include redness, bruising, cuts, burns, fractures, etc. If there is not a previous known explanation for the cause of the physical injuries, asking the person a simple question about their injury can help determine if further action or investigation is needed. If warranted and approved by state and local regulation and by the person's interdisciplinary team, it is possible for these injuries to be captured in a documented body check. However, for people who do not have body checks as part of their routine, these injuries may only be noticed when the person shows them to a caregiver or loved one, or identified when providing support. We are mandated reporters. The safety and well-being of the people we support is the highest priority. Caregivers are in the position to be the first to notice signs and symptoms of abuse or neglect. The law requires caregivers and those in the social services field to report any suspicion of abuse or neglect to Protective Services. The Protective Service Agency will investigate and determine whether abuse or neglect is occurring, not you. Your role is to report your suspicions, and to report them immediately. Every state has its own Protective Service Agency. Find out where you need to report your suspicions of abuse and neglect. The people you support depend on you. When there are no visible signs of physical abuse, monitoring for emotional and/or psychological distress is the other method for identifying possible abuse. Signs of emotional or psychological distress may include being withdrawn, avoidance, fearfulness, changes in sleeping or eating patterns, risk-taking behaviors that are out of the norm for the individual, or comments they make that may suggest an allegation. These behavioral signs of physical abuse may vary in severity, and there could be other signs that were not listed above. The key is to monitor for any changes from the person's social, behavioral norms. When working with a person who does not verbalize or use words to communicate, behavioral signs may be critical to monitor. Caregivers should be diligent to report these factors and escalate to their reporting supervisor, if an employee, or to their program contact, such as a coordinator, if a mentor, as the person may need you to advocate. The second type of abuse is exploitation. The information provided is shared with us by Stacy Larson, Senior Quality Improvement Manager, CSS Co., from Minnesota. I just needed to borrow $20 for gas to get home after work. I really meant to pay the person back. That is one example of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. It is the kind of abuse that is often not recognized as exploitation by perpetrators, because they simply believe they are borrowing money and do not recognize the harm they pose to the individual. Financial exploitation is often carried out by trusted people in the individual's life, including caregivers, family members, friends, or acquaintances. These trusted people use their relationship with the person to commit these crimes. Think about the relationship between a caregiver and a person served. There is an inherent power gap favoring the caregiver. Additionally, if the person has limited cognitive abilities or requires assistance with activities of daily living, their risk of being exploited increases. Financial exploitation can be slow and systematic or may be spontaneous. Examples include theft of any amount of cash, purchasing an item from a person for less than market value, taking rewards, discounts or promotional gifts on behalf of the person. There are warning signs to be aware of and acted on. Such warning signs may include an increase in withdrawals, frequent or increased ATM withdrawals, checks written out of order and written for cash, receipts not maintained, unusual purchases made at places the person does not typically use, account documentation is disorganized, incomplete or missing, family, friends or caregivers express unusual interest in the person's financial affairs, to name a few. Behavior changes or signs that might demonstrate warning signs include, but not limited to, a sudden reluctance to discuss matters which they routinely discussed before, a sudden change in their overall behavior or actions, the person becomes withdrawn or avoids specific settings or people, the person seems fearful, confused or cannot understand the transactions. If there is a person that is of interest for possibly exploiting someone, some behavior or actions they may demonstrate include, but not limited to, speaking for or over the person, appears to intimidate or frighten the person, isolates the person, may become angry, evasive, or aggressive if asked about transactions, or they may be overly smooth in their response or overly vague. Responsible financial paperwork is not performed, or is disorganized and responds with, "I will get it to you later," and consistently reports not receiving the bank statements. In summary, in order to prevent and recognize all types of abuse, education is needed to include defining what it is and how to report it. All support staff must be knowledgeable not only in what physical abuse is, but also what to do if there is suspected abuse, who and how to report it. We must recognize we are all mandatory reporters and it is the law to report any suspected abuse. Support staff must have adequate training on how to assist individuals with their functional needs and to speak up if they do not fully understand how to effectively and safely support the person. Furthermore, the people at risk should receive education on recognizing physical abuse, and on knowing who within their support system they can turn to if they have been abused. The resources for this presentation are noted on this slide. Thank you for your time and attention.